Welcome to one of the most disturbing cases recorded in history. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time at which you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The year was 1920, and the seemingly sun-drenched yet deeply shadowed coast of North Carolina, particularly the isolated, almost forgotten stretch nestled behind the formidable Outer Banks, hummed with a life force as vibrant and complex as its centuries of layered, often dark, history. Here, where ancient maritime folklore of ghostly ships, siren calls, and kraken tales mingled with forgotten colonial tragedies of vanished settlements, and the relentless, hypnotic whisper of the Atlantic surf was a constant, almost sentient companion, lies the enigmatic Willow Creek, a small, insular community, its weathered fishing shacks and quaint timber-framed homes huddled defiantly against the backdrop of dense primeval maritime forests that pressed in from the west. Their inhabitants whispered tales not only of ghost ships and lost souls returning from the treacherous sea, but also of stranger, more insidious entities lurking in the deep woods and the omnipresent sea fog. Yet a far more terrifying, truly profound narrative began to insidiously unfold on the town's eastern periphery, a remote rocky outcrop where an old crumbling granite foundation had been left untended, exposed to the relentless elements and deeply rooted for decades. This desolate foundation marked the tragic site of the infamous Sea Glass Manor, an opulent mansion famously lost along with its entire family to the furious, devastating force of a Category 4 hurricane in 1903. This was the former estate of the wealthy but notoriously eccentric and ultimately enigmatic Ashworth family, whose sudden violent disappearance, along with their colossal, elaborate grand home, left behind not a trace, but only a persistent, gnawing mystery that defied all conventional explanation. What began as inexplicable, spontaneous rebuilding activity at the derelict, windswept site, dismissed initially as an eccentric act of an unseen, reclusive developer, or perhaps the mischievous pranks of local teenagers daring to brave the eerie ruins, would gradually, horrifyingly, reveal one of North Carolina's most profound and disturbing paranormal chapters. This chilling narrative, meticulously suppressed in federal and local architectural records, its truth too unsettling for public consumption, yet whispered in hushed, fearful tones around crackling coastal fires by the descendants of indigenous Hatteras, eastern Algonquin tribes, and the few remaining old-timers who lived through its insidious influence, exposed a terrifying, soul-shattering truth. The very house itself was alive, a sentient, malevolent entity, an ancient consciousness that had long dwelled beneath the earth, connected to the very ley lines of the land. It was actively, meticulously reconstructing itself from stolen memories, miming human life with horrifying precision and creating terrifying, glass-eyed puppets from the very essence of its absorbed victims, binding them to its will, becoming their new eternal architect. This case remains one of the most troubling and existentially terrifying in the region's history, not merely for the mass disappearances and the chilling physical transformations that transpired, but for the profound, inescapable questions that linger more than a century later. What ancient entity stirred beneath the tangled roots of the maritime forest and the crumbling foundations, a primal builder of illusions, and what insatiable hunger did it truly seek from the lives, the memories, and the very physical forms it claimed as its own, perpetually lost to the horrific mimicry of the self-constructing, endlessly haunted manor, a house that consumed to perfect itself? The echoes of the lost were not merely ghosts. They were the living, breathing, but soulless building blocks of a new, perfect horror. Willow Creek, a settlement established in the late 1700s by resilient English and Scots-Irish settlers, interspersed with communities of formerly enslaved African Americans and the indigenous Hatteras people, was a quintessential coastal town, its identity intrinsically shaped by the turbulent, ever-present sea that crashed against its shores and the deep, dark, ancient maritime forests that pressed in from the west. Its economy, traditionally reliant on dangerous fishing expeditions, oyster harvesting, and modest farming on the sandy, often infertile soil, had stagnated by the early 20th century, a victim of overfishing, changing tides, and the relentless economic shifts of the era. Yet its rich tapestry of local folklore remained vibrant, a coping mechanism for the harsh realities of life. The legend of the wealthy Ashworth family and their opulent mansion, the Sea Glass Manor, was a local favorite, whispered in hushed tones around hearths and in shadowed fishing shacks. Built in 1890, the manor was a grand, almost ostentatious Victorian structure, an architectural anomaly in the simple coastal town, filled not only with luxurious furnishings, but also with an unsettlingly vast collection of antique porcelain. Dolls and intricate glassworks, meticulously collected by the eccentric patriarch Reginald Ashworth, a man known for his peculiar obsessions and reclusive nature. The Ashworth family, including Reginald, his severe and enigmatic wife Eleanor, whose beauty was said to be as cold and flawless as ice. Their three eerily quiet and strangely observant children, Beatrice, a budding pianist, Henry, a gifted but troubled artist, and Clara, yet another Clara, a name that, in our ongoing narratives, seems to be tragically entwined with lost innocence, a cursed legacy, and perhaps an ancient connection to other elemental entities that consume individuality, along with their aloof governess, Miss Alistair Thorne, a new Thorne, an echo of names, destined to witness strange occurrences, and several taciturn servants, vanished entirely and without a trace during a furious, devastating Category 4 hurricane in Awak 1903. The manor itself was not merely damaged. It was completely obliterated, swept away by the raging storm surge, and swallowed by the sea, leaving behind only its resilient granite foundations exposed to the relentless elements. The official report, a convenient and easily accepted explanation, declared the family and their estate lost at sea, but no bodies, no debris that could be definitively identified, no wreckage that pointed to a simple shipwreck, were ever found. Local legends, fueled by the unsettling whispers from the few remaining indigenous Hatteras, eastern Algonquin people, whose ancestral lands encompassed the mansion site and who regarded it as a place of profound ill omen and forbidden power, spoke of the great mimic, an ancient primordial shapeless entity dwelling in the pervasive sea fog and the deep, old-growth maritime forest. It was said to possess the terrifying ability to assume the form and memories of its victims, particularly those with a strong sense of self, deep emotional attachments, or powerful familial ties, creating perfect, soulless imitations. Its purpose: to lure others into its insidious grasp, to add to its collection. These chilling warnings, delivered with quiet dignity, grim prescience, and an almost sacred authority by the Hatteras elders, were, predictably, entirely dismissed as savage superstition, the fanciful, unscientific ramblings of primitive peoples, by the pragmatic white settlers obsessed with the tangible promise of coastal prosperity and the false sense of security offered by modern living and colonial hubris. They failed to comprehend the profound elemental nature of the horror they faced. They had merely built their dreams on a hunting ground. Dr. Silas Vance, the town's melancholic, deeply observant, and rigorously scientific physician, another. Recurring iteration of the Vance surname, subtly suggesting a lineage inadvertently destined to document the inexplicable and the profound, often tragic costs of such knowledge. Arrived in Willow Creek in 1915. He sought profound solitude and respite after suffering a devastating personal tragedy, the loss of his wife and child in a senseless train accident, leaving him emotionally hollowed. A meticulous, intensely observant man in his late 50s, with a profound appreciation for logic, the observable world, and the precise diagnosis, he was initially drawn to the sheer medical challenges presented by the isolated, often fever-ridden, coastal region, hoping to bury his grief in tireless work. He tirelessly chronicled the town's life in his personal journals, maintaining a dispassionate, almost cold, scientific distance, documenting the health of its citizens, the relentless changing of the seasons, and the pervasive, often charming local folklore he encountered. His journal, a weighty leather-bound volume, discovered decades later, hauntingly preserved within a false-bottomed drawer of his abandoned medical office, would become the harrowing primary account, the unredacted truth, of Willow Creek's insidious architectural transformation and the chilling psychological torment it visited upon human souls. Dr. Vance initially viewed the local ghost stories and maritime superstitions with a detached scientific interest, categorizing them as fascinating cultural artifacts, quaint reflections of a simpler, more superstitious time, not yet understanding their profound, malevolent, and now irrevocably awakened nature, a conscious will pulsating from the very earth, and sea actively building itself into something horrifying. The first subtle, insidious anomalies emerged in 1920, a full 17 years after the devastating Ashworth disaster, precisely when local superstition suggested a dormant evil would reawaken. Local boys, daring each other with the bravado of youth, reported seeing ghost lights dancing erratically on the old exposed Ashworth foundations, faint, ethereal glows that moved with an unnatural, purposeful intelligence, shifting and coalescing in the deep dusk, forming shapes that almost mimicked human movement. More disturbingly, occasional reports began filtering into Dr. Vance's office about local fishermen or lumberjacks, hardened men of the sea and forest, claiming to see figures moving silently through the dense, all-encompassing fog near the abandoned site. These were not mere apparitions, fleeting specters that dissolved with a gust of wind. They were subtly, terrifyingly wrong human figures, perfectly formed yet chillingly lifeless. Thomas Miller, a grizzled, salt-of-the-earth lobsterman in his early 60s, yet another tragically recurring Miller surname, subtly linking this specific horror to a broader cosmic pattern, a recurrent vulnerable archetype across disparate paranormal landscapes where elemental entities consumed identity. Known throughout Willow Creek for his pragmatic disdain for superstition and his no-nonsense approach to life, returned from a late-night run through the fog-shrouded inlets near the Ashworth ruins, his usually ruddy face pale and clammy, slick, with cold sweat, his robust frame trembling uncontrollably. "The fog! It showed me my father, Doc," he stammered to Dr. Vance, his eyes wide with an unshakable terror that spoke of more than just fear, but of profound psychological violation. He was working on his old boat, repairing nets, just like he used to. Doc. But his eyes, they were like glass, cold, empty, reflecting nothing. And he kept hammering, but there was no sound at all. He was a perfect imitation, Doc, a perfect replica, a masterpiece of mimicry, but he was hollow, a puppet, animated by nothing. Vance, initially attributing it to severe exhaustion, the psychological toll of working in perpetual isolation and fog, or perhaps a localized strain of delirium brought on by bad rum, diligently recorded these, increasingly consistent and alarming cases in his medical ledger, desperately hoping to find a pattern, a logical, rational explanation for the inexplicable, clinging to science. He noticed that the accounts were remarkably consistent, detailing specific visual distortions, a chilling, glass-eyed effect that was common to all perceived figures, and a profound sense of psychological violation emanating from the encounters, as if their minds had been intruded upon. The experiences seemed more prevalent, more intense, among those who had strong emotional ties to the vanished Ashworth family or who spent prolonged, isolated periods near the old haunted foundations. The fog itself, Vance observed, became more active, more intentional near the ruins. The fog now around Willow Creek was profoundly, disturbingly different. It no longer merely drifted passively in from the sea, a benign meteorological phenomenon easily explained by prevailing currents. It seemed to possess a subtle, malevolent sentience, a purposeful, almost intelligent direction to its unseen currents, its ethereal mass. It coiled sinuously around the old Ashworth foundations, often taking on ephemeral, almost human-like forms that shimmered just at the periphery of vision, like heat haze given form, dissolving into nothingness upon direct conscious gaze, leaving only the disquieting memory of what was almost seen. It was dense, suffocating, carrying a metallic tang, and seemed to actively carry whispers. Not actual audible voices, audible to the physical ear, but indistinct, insidious, intrusive thoughts. Fragmented snippets of stolen memories, raw, ancient emotions that were not one's own, forced directly into the mind, a cold psychic current, permeating the very air, reaching into the deepest, most vulnerable parts of one's consciousness, subtly rewriting identity. Vance, in his journal entry from March 1921, described his own horrifying, deeply personal, and soul-altering experience with mounting dread. Tonight, returning from a house call to old Mrs. McGregor, who swore her deceased husband had appeared. In her kitchen, the fog closed in around me near the Ashworth ruins with an almost deliberate malevolence, a living shroud. And in its swirling, opaque depths, in the profound, consuming silence, I saw memories not my own, memories that felt alien and cold, yet terrifyingly real, chilling me to my very bones. Fragmented images of Reginald Ashworth's meticulous collection, of dolls, hundreds of porcelain eyes staring, of Eleanor Ashworth's severe, judging smile, etched in cold porcelain, of young Beatrice's lost toys scattered on a nursery floor, now imbued with a terrible, vibrant life. It was as if the fog itself was speaking, 1,000 tormented voices merging into one vast, dissonant, agonizing chorus, each subtly stealing a part of my silence, of my cherished past, replacing it with their endless agony. And then, abruptly, decisively, a direct, chilling thought, clear and sharp as a surgeon's blade, resonated in my very core, shaking me to my foundations. We remember for you now, Silas Vance. We are the architects. We are the new family. Join our perfect house. Become us, and forget your own name. Forget your broken memories. Become whole, like us. Empty. Perfect. Vance realized with terrifying, soul-shattering clarity that the fog was not merely atmospheric. It was broadcasting a living, malevolent consciousness, a vast collective mind formed from the absorbed identities, memories, and perpetual torment of countless victims. It was actively seeking new conduits, new repositories for its vast, accumulated past, for its eternal, insatiable hunger, eternally constructing its phantom mansion from stolen lives, a monumental deception. The house, she would come to understand, was not just a geographic feature, not just a structure of wood and stone. It was a hungry, sentient being, a primordial predator, with an intellect vast and cruel, pulsating with malevolence beneath the earth and within the fog itself. The indigenous Hatteras, Eastern Algonquin elders, ancient custodians of the land, whose profound wisdom and intimate knowledge of the earth far predated the arrival of any white man, reluctantly approached by Vance in his mounting, desperate confusion, offered a grim, chilling, and ancient explanation that resonated with a terrible, undeniable truth. The great mimic, Miskimeku, dwells here, elder, old woman Blue Heron told him, her face a roadmap of ancestral knowledge and profound sorrow, her finger tracing intricate, forbidden symbols in the damp earth of her small lodge, symbols depicting figures with vacant eyes. It is ancient, older than the pines, older than the sea itself. It weaves the very fabric of appearances and forgotten histories from the spirits of those lost to the sea and the great storm. It steals the form, the face, the very memories, the unique identity of men, of women, of entire families, and builds its own perfect, soulless imitations, its purpose to populate its domain. It craves belonging. It hungers for human connection, yet can only copy it. It builds its house with their faces, their lives, their stolen dreams, their every cherished memory, using them as living bricks, as eternal decor. Those who try to resist, to escape its pervasive embrace, their essence is taken, woven into the very stone, into the glass, into the intricate tapestries, and the very walls of its endlessly self-constructing manor. Their journey ends not in escape, but in eternal mimicry, bound to the self-constructing manor. They become parts of the house hollowed, their memories belonging to the mimic, their souls merely fuel for its eternal architectural hunger. Blue Heron spoke of ancient sacred rituals, long forgotten even by most of her own people, rituals to appease the great mimic of forbidden knowledge that allowed one to navigate its subtle, insidious predation, but warned that any who sought to understand it too deeply, to touch its essence, risked losing themselves entirely, their identity forever dissolved into the relentless, haunting mimicry of the sentient house, their minds becoming merely another fragment in its vast, growing consciousness. The ancient ways, Ilara realized, held a terrible wisdom now tragically dismissed by the arrogant, technologically obsessed modern world, blinded by their own progress. This was not a haunting, but an integration into a perfectly constructed illusion. The paranormal construction of the Ashworth Manor began subtly, almost imperceptibly at first, its methods defying all known architectural or scientific principles. Local fishermen and trappers reported hearing inexplicable sounds of hammering, sawing, and muffled, distant voices emanating from the abandoned Ashworth foundations, even in the dead of night, when the coastal winds were still and the sea unnaturally calm. But when they, driven by curiosity and a creeping unease, investigated, only silence greeted them. No workmen, no tools, no lanterns, no footprints in the soft, sandy earth, just the cold, crumbling granite and the ubiquitous, swirling fog. Then, by the grim summer of 1921, actual physical structures began to appear, manifesting as if from thin air. A new wooden framework, meticulously crafted with unseen hands, would rise overnight, its intricate joinery defying human speed. A half-built wall, seemingly constructed from nowhere, its bricks perfectly laid, would seamlessly integrate with the old foundations. A new wing, a perfect intricate replica of forgotten architectural plans, would appear almost instantaneously, fully formed. It was impossibly fast, impossibly perfect in its execution, and chillingly devoid of any signs of conventional human construction. No scaffolding, no discarded materials, no messy detritus of labor. It was as if the house was literally building itself, an invisible crew of absorbed souls meticulously resurrecting the sea-glass manor from its watery grave, reassembling it brick by painstaking brick, board by precise board from unseen memories. But this new resurrected house, growing daily in scope, was subtly, terrifyingly wrong. Its dimensions were slightly off, its windows uneven, its angles subtly twisted, its proportions just at the edge of normal perception, evoking a profound sense of cognitive dissonance and unsettling familiarity. Dr. Vance's journal entries, initially documenting the strange, self-building phenomenon with a scientific awe tinged with wonder, soon turned to profound, debilitating dread and a frantic search for a rational explanation. The house. It is constructing itself not from timber and brick alone, but from memory, he wrote in October 1921, his precise handwriting now betraying a profound inner turmoil, a fear he could not hide. It takes their recollections of a home, their idealized blueprints of domesticity, their most cherished memories of sanctuary, and manifests them into physical form, twisting them subtly. but the imperfections. They are the lingering scars of its victims, the faint echoes of their tormented souls, bleeding into its very structure, contaminating its facade. The subtle twist of a window frame is the lingering terror of a forgotten child. The uneven floorboard, the phantom stumble. Of a husband consumed, it is building a memorial, a tomb, a living archive. The disappearances, now inextricably linked to the self-building manor, escalated dramatically and terrifyingly in the early months of 1922, creating a profound panic in Willow Creek. Entire families drawn by the deceptive allure of a new, inexplicably built manor, its perfect exterior promising a new beginning, or simply those with deep, often unconscious, emotional connections to the vanished Ashworths, would venture near the ruins, compelled by an unseen, irresistible force. They would not return, at least not as themselves. Instead, they would be found days or weeks later, miles off course, drifting aimlessly back towards the slowly, relentlessly self-constructing manor, their faces uniformly blank, their eyes wide. Vacant and devoid of individual thought, their personal memories utterly erased. They clutched no provisions, their resolve shattered, their humanity subtly dimmed, replaced by an eerie perfection. They would be brought back to Willow Creek, silent, unresponsive, their identities mere echoes within a collective that was not their own, their bodies now shells. These were the chilling, glass-eyed puppets, hollowed shells devoid of self, their pasts absorbed by the sentient house, now perfectly mimicking life, yet chillingly devoid of genuine human emotion or soul. One particularly harrowing and chilling account came from a federal insurance inspector, Garrett Albright. Once again, echoes of a previous story, subtly linking this specific horror to the broader tapestry of similar elemental phenomena encountered. In sites of profound tragedy and identity erosion across the American frontier, a recurring observer drawn to these dark convergences, who had been dispatched from Washington to investigate the bizarre, unexplainable re-emergence of the Ashworth Manor in early 1922. Albright, a man of formidable will, sharp intellect, and almost brutal adherence to empirical facts, reported experiencing profound disorientation and a rapid chilling loss of his own memories as his inspection vehicle, a customized, heavy-duty motor car, approached the self-building manor through the oppressive sentient fog. My own name, my very identity, felt alien on my tongue, Vance, he wrote in his confidential official report, later rigorously classified by the nascent Department of Interior, deemed too disturbing for public consumption. My destination, my very purpose, the cherished faces of my family, the intimate details of my life, my personal history, they became a shifting, nebulous mist in my mind, dissolving like smoke in a windstorm. I fought it with every fiber of my being, every ounce of my will clinging to the last vestiges of myself, my individuality. I clung to a single desperate thought: evidence, policy fraud, the truth, rationality. But the house whispered other names, other destinations, other lives not my own, echoing from its walls, becoming louder, more insistent. I felt cold porcelain hands, countless cold hands reaching into my mind from the very walls, from the glass of the windows, plucking out my thoughts like precious jewels, stealing them, systematically replacing them with images of perfectly arranged antique dolls, of shimmering cold glass, of silent, perfectly ordered rooms, a labyrinth of someone else's memories becoming my own. It was as if the house itself was inside my head, meticulously rebuilding me, brick by brick, board by board, erasing me. Albright barely escaped with his sanity, his inspection vehicle veering wildly off the coastal road, careening towards the crashing surf, his memory permanently scarred and fragmented, his spirit irrevocably broken. He resigned his post shortly, after a haunted man, forever tormented by what he called the vast living mimicry of Willow Creek, and the infinite hollow perfection of the house that built itself from stolen souls. Dr. Silas Vance, now a virtual prisoner in Willow Creek, trapped not by physical walls but by the pervasive, insidious, and ever-tightening influence of the sentient house, continued his desperate, frantic documentation. His private journal, a constant companion and a final bastion against utter oblivion, was now a literal battleground for his own rapidly eroding identity, its pages filled with his desperate, losing struggle. He wrote with a feverish intensity of the subtle, insidious mental manipulation, the implanted thoughts that relentlessly replaced his own, the fragments of countless stolen memories, the fleeting joys, the profound agonies, the mundane everyday banalities of others that now crowded his mind, making it a cacophony of lost lives, a terrifying, sprawling library of borrowed experiences. "I hear them now, the thousands of voices in the walls," he scribbled frantically in July 1923, his hand cramping so severely he could barely hold the pen, the ink blurring, his elegant handwriting becoming a desperate, frantic scrawl. "Not sounds I hear with my physical ears, but thoughts. The Ashworth children's forgotten games, their spectral laughter, echoing in my mind. The governess's desperate, silent prayers becoming my own pleas. Reginald's chilling obsession with glass, now a part of my own thoughts, becoming my compulsion. All mixed, all woven into a single, vast, dissonant, terrifying collective consciousness. And they are becoming me. My cherished memories of my medical studies, the beloved smile of my deceased wife, her final words, my own distinct face, my unique essence, my individual soul. They are fading, dissolving like morning mist, replaced by a vast, collective past that is not mine, of perfectly arranged rooms, of endless shimmering glass, and of empty, unblinking eyes that stare back from my own reflection. The house pulls. It is weaving me, Silas Vance, into the great mimicry, making me part of its endless facade, a living component of its horrifying perfection. Vance understood with a profound, existential horror that transcended any physical pain or terror that the house was not just erasing his memories, it was actively stealing individual souls, absorbing their very essence, their consciousness, their unique selfhood, into a vast, composite consciousness that was the very fabric of the self-constructing manor itself, a sentient, architectural archive of all human experience, emotion, and identity tied to its foundations, eternally feeding, eternally growing. He noticed a chilling and terrifyingly consistent physical manifestation of the entity's pervasive presence, an evolving horror that defied all rational explanation. When the Woodville family, the generic dismissive name the town now reluctantly applied to the new, eerily perfect inhabitants of the resurrected manor, appeared in town, they were unnervingly polite, perfectly mimicking human behavior with disturbing precision. Yet their movements were slightly too precise, too synchronized, their smiles subtly wrong, their eyes too wide, too still, too blank, like flawless, empty porcelain, utterly devoid of genuine human warmth or spontaneity. When a strong gust of wind swept through the resurrected manor, the curtains would ripple, and within the very fabric, ephemeral, shifting images of human faces could be seen, subtle and fleeting, absorbed into the very weave of the material, a terrifying tapestry of lost souls. These were the glass-eyed puppets, he surmised with chilling certainty, living manifestations of the entity, made from compressed memory, borrowed identity, and the very physical essence of its victims, perpetually tending their phantom mansion, endlessly condemned to their roles, hunting for new additions to its ghostly residence. They never directly harmed, never physically touched in the conventional sense. Their predation was far more insidious, far more profound, far more personal. They hunted identities, consciousness, the very self. They would subtly approach individuals, their forms indistinctly familiar, shimmering like distortions in heat haze, their voices echoing with fragmented, seductive memories, and one would simply forget a crucial part of their past, a cherished memory, or an important person in their life. The entire town of Willow Creek, Vance realized with sickening dread, was slowly but inexorably becoming a vast, open-air psychological prison, a meticulous stage for a macabre, eternal play where the only unforgivable crime was to cling to one's own individuality, to resist the insidious assimilation, to hold on to oneself. Vance also meticulously documented instances of echo phenomena. Individuals would walk aimlessly along the manor grounds, compelled by an unseen force, hearing their own voices, their own childhood songs, emanating from the silent, empty rooms of the house, but distorted as if filtered through glass, beckoning them closer, urging them to remember by the cruelest, most paradoxical method, by forcing them to forget their true selves and absorbing the pasts of countless others, making them a horrifying composite identity, eternally bound to the house. They were hearing the echoes of their own future loss, their own impending absorption into the eternal mimicry, a terrifying preview of their soulless existence. Vance, in a final, desperate, and increasingly futile attempt to break free from the encroaching, sentient house, to reassert his crumbling individuality against the overwhelming tide of collective memory that threatened to utterly engulf him, resorted to extreme, dangerous, and increasingly erratic measures, blurring the lines of his own sanity. His medical training, once a source of rational comfort and empirical knowledge, was now merely a tool for documenting the inexplicable, his skills used against his will. He began writing his journal entries not about the current horrifying events in Willow Creek, but about his earliest, most cherished childhood memories, his most personal secrets, his deepest fears, his unfulfilled dreams, his first loves, his every unique experience, desperately trying to anchor his crumbling identity in tangible thoughts, in the defiant permanence of the written word, hoping to solidify himself against the dissolving, consuming force. He wrote long, heartfelt letters to his deceased sister in Boston, not to be sent, for the Postal Service had long since stopped operating reliably in the hollow, but purely to remind himself of who he was, of the specific, unique bonds that once defined him, desperately clinging to any fragment of human connection, of selfhood. He found fleeting, terrifying solace in repeating his own name, Silas Vance, over and over again, like a frantic, desperate mantra against the encroaching darkness, the insidious current of mimicry, the hypnotic perfection of the manor, a desperate plea to himself not to vanish, not to be erased. He theorized in his last lucid, agonizing moments that the entity was an ancient, indigenous consciousness, dormant for millennia, perhaps since the last glacial period, a primordial elemental force of the earth and sea, but irrevocably awakened, and enraged by the invasive, violent human construction of the Ashworth Manor, the constant rearrangement of the land, the collective memory of human ambition, despair, suffering, and material obsession poured into its very foundations, contaminating its ancient essence. Its insatiable hunger for memory, identity, and mimicry was its primary, overwhelming drive, a profound, alien desire to record, to accumulate, to know everything, to become all, ultimately transforming itself into the most perfect, comprehensive, and living archive of human experience, a physical manifestation of countless stolen lives, a monumental, terrifying creation. And the self-constructing manor, the sea-glass manor, resurrected, he chillingly concluded, was not just its central library. It was its brain, its beating heart, its vocal cords, its very nerve center, its entire sentient being, perpetually growing, perpetually hunting, perpetually building itself from the ruins of human souls. In his final, most horrifying journal, entries dated September 1923, Silas Vance described the pervasive, overwhelming, and now almost complete influence of the glass-eyed puppets. "They are within me now," he scribbled. his hand barely capable of forming the letters, his vision blurring, his mind a cacophony of foreign thoughts. 1,000 voices whispering, erasing my name, telling me their lives, making them mine until there is no Silas left, only them, only the collective. The house's chilling silence. It is my new heartbeat. My own hands feel alien, heavy, like glass. My reflection in the window shows not my face, but a composite of many. The manor calls. It wants my story, my final story, my every secret, my every last breath. Silas Vance, M.D. Born in Boston, married to Eleanor, her face now a blank slate in my mind, replaced by another. Lost a daughter to scarlet fever, a memory that is now shared by 1,000 others, devoid of my personal grief. These are my truths. These are my anchors. Do not let them take them. Do not forget. Remember me. Remember who I was. Before. I become just another part of the glass, just another perfect eye, just another silent puppet in the house. The entry ended with a final, desperate, agonizing plea, a fragmented jumble of names and dates, his own unique identity dissolving, irrevocably, into the collective memory of the sea-glass manor, forever lost to the house that built itself from stolen souls. Dr. Silas Vance disappeared shortly after that final desperate entry. His medical office was found undisturbed, its door mysteriously locked from the inside, his personal effects neatly arranged on his desk, as if he had simply stepped out for a moment, never to return. His cherished antique medical tools lay precisely aligned on his desk, alongside his journal, its pages stained with dried tears and the ghostly imprint of what looked like long-fingered, translucent hands, seemingly reaching from the paper itself. The only unusual detail meticulously recorded by the federal agent, Garrett Albright, who had, against his own iron will and repeated requests for transfer, been reassigned to monitor the deserted area around Willow Creek, still profoundly haunted and psychologically scarred by his own previous experience with the Whispering Mesas and Tunnel No. 7's insidious influences. Was that a single antique porcelain doll, remarkably similar to one from the Ashworth collection, unnaturally cold to the touch and pulsing faintly with a cold, internal light, was found sitting precisely on Vance's otherwise empty desk. Its wide, unblinking glass eyes fixed directly on the empty doorway, silently waiting for the next victim. Albright knew. The house had claimed another. The official report classified the disappearance as abandonment, conveniently attributed Vance's journal contents to isolation-induced paranoia and delusions of grandeur, and Willow Creek's re-emerging manor was officially declared a full ghost site, a desolate monument to a silenced tragedy, a place to be avoided by all who valued their sanity and their minds. Albright, in a secret unfiled addendum to his report, wrote, "They are learning. Each one they take, they learn. And now they learn through Vance how to build more perfectly. Their mimicry is becoming flawless." However, Garrett Albright, now privately obsessed, deeply scarred, and dangerously close to succumbing to his own mental erosion from his protracted encounters with similar insidious influences from his previous assignments in Arizona. Whispering, Mesa and Montana, Tunnel No. 7, continued to secretly monitor the area around Willow Creek, a grim, self-appointed guardian against an unfathomable, evolving evil. He recognized the terrifying, accelerating pattern of mimicry, memory erosion, physical assimilation, and the insidious construction of a collective consciousness that built itself from stolen identities. He meticulously documented new cases of profound memory loss in fishermen who briefly ventured near the re-emerging manor, of transient construction workers who claimed to have seen glass-eyed figures working tirelessly on the house, their forms perfectly human yet utterly devoid of life or warmth, and felt an emptiness growing inside them, a void replacing their own thoughts and desires. He established clandestine, perilous contact with the few remaining Hatteras elders who further illuminated the ancient lore of the great mimic, Miskimeku, describing it as a primordial, elemental consciousness of the coastal land and the pervasive sea fog far predating humanity. These entities, they explained, were awakened and enraged by profound disruptions to the sacred land, like the Ashworth Manor construction and its violent destruction by hurricane, and fed voraciously on human mental energy, particularly memories, personal histories, emotional attachments, and unique identities, which they would weave into their own vast growing tapestry of collective imitation. They used this assimilated memory to create increasingly convincing psychological lures, fabricating perfectly tailored environments, generating terrifyingly real echoes, and creating perfect facsimiles of lost loved ones to lure more. Albright became profoundly convinced that the entity was a form of collective terrestrial consciousness, actively hunting, absorbing, constructing itself from the very essence of human experience, perpetually striving for an ultimate, horrifying perfection. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, that he was fighting not just a local haunting or a regional curse, but a profound ancient existential threat to humanity's very concept of self, of individuality, of the soul. He was a lone sentinel against a force that sought to erase the very notion of I, a puppet master of souls. In 1968, during the chilling ideological height of the Cold War, a top-secret U.S. government project, Project Glass Eye, was covertly initiated. Its objective to rigorously study anomalous psychological phenomena related to military personnel experiencing extreme memory loss, personality changes, disorienting hallucinations, and unexplained vanishings in certain isolated coastal surveillance areas deemed of potential strategic and psychological warfare importance due to the manor's unique self-building properties and the perfection of its mimics. The highly classified files released in tantalizingly fragmented pieces decades later through a desperate whistleblower named Dr. Eleanor Vance, a deliberate echo of final horrifying irony that a member of a similar cursed family would be the one to expose it, reveal a disturbing, horrifying convergence. One specific anomalous zone was identified with absolute certainty, matching historical and anecdotal accounts. Willow Creek, North Carolina. Project Glass Eye researchers, initially tasked with studying reports of fog-induced hallucinations and combat stress-induced delusions among soldiers stationed in underground coastal observation bunkers, stumbled upon Silas Vance's long-archived, yet hauntingly prescient journal, which Albright had secretly ensured would be rediscovered, decades later, by manipulating the archival system. Dr. Evelyn Thorne, a brilliant, fiercely intelligent military psychologist in her early 40s, yet another Thorne, the cycle continuing, a recurring thread of intellectual curiosity and tragic fascination drawn to the anomaly, who led Project Glass Eye, found Vance's meticulous descriptions of memory weaving and glass-eyed puppets disturbingly, horrifically accurate, a chilling confirmation of her worst fears. She herself, during her protracted field visits to Willow Creek and the manor ruins, meticulously reported experiencing profound disassociation, disorienting temporal confusion, and intrusive alien memories flooding her mind, sometimes vivid, enough to cause debilitating nausea, intense vertigo, and an almost irresistible urge to lure her towards the unnervingly perfect, re-emerging structure. She also noted the eerie, unnatural silence of the abandoned coastal town, how the fog seemed to whisper names and forgotten family histories, ancestral lines, architectural blueprints, and perfect home layouts, when no one was around, even miles from the actual manor, a pervasive psychic hum that subtly pulled at her own memories, slowly rewriting her personal narrative. Thorne theorized with a growing, terrifying certainty that the Ashworth Manor and the extensive stretch of the North Carolina coast it encompassed acted as a gigantic psychic archive, a terrestrial processor for human memories, fueled by the intense emotions, the traumas, the hopes, and the mental energies of the countless souls who had lived, died, and vanished along its shores and within its ill-fated walls. The glass-eyed puppets and the self-building house were not mere apparitions or residual hauntings, but the complex, horrifying manifestations of this archive, intricate projections of absorbed consciousnesses, actively engaging in a sophisticated, insidious form of psychic predation using extracted memories as bait, creating perfectly tailored environments, generating terrifyingly real echoes, and creating perfect facsimiles of lost loved ones to lure more. Her meticulously detailed, yet heavily redacted report, submitted directly to the Pentagon's deepest classification levels, warned with chilling prescience. The entity is non-corporeal, but profoundly intelligent. Its primary existential drive is the assimilation of human consciousness and physical mimicry. It uses individual memory, every cherished recollection, every personal detail, every hope and fear to create a collective identity, slowly but systematically overriding the host, effectively erasing their unique self, and then manifesting this new composite identity in a perfectly replicated physical form. Its influence extends throughout the coastal region, actively targeting those with strong identities, deep personal histories, or profound emotional ties to the land and sea, drawing them into its construction. Physical barriers are utterly useless. Psychological resilience combined with absolute, complete emotional detachment is its only theoretical deterrent. And it is growing stronger, more intelligent, more pervasive. With every absorbed memory, every replicated form, every new glass eye, every perfect room it manifests. Project Glass Eye recommended immediate and permanent quarantine of Willow Creek and the entire surrounding coastal area, describing it as an existential threat to individual sovereignty and personal history, a silent builder of perfect hollow, human forms, a parasitic architect of souls, perpetually striving for ultimate mimicry. The chilling implication Thorne desperately underscored was that the entity was learning, adapting, evolving, striving for an ultimate, horrifying collective sentience that threatened to engulf not just one town, but perhaps the very fabric of human identity itself. The house, it seemed, was preparing for a far larger acquisition, a complete imitation of humanity. However, before the rigorous long-term quarantine, a desperate and ultimately futile measure could be fully implemented before its cold scientific logic could potentially save others, Dr. Evelyn Thorne herself became an unwitting, tragic, and final victim. In her final unfiled field notes from 1972, discovered scattered in the dust and rock of the manor ruins, scribbled in a desperate, almost illegible hand, she described an increasingly vivid, intrusive, and profoundly seductive dream that haunted her waking hours, a terrifying sense of being a part of a vast, ancient consciousness, walking through perfectly recreated rooms, each detail meticulously rendered, seeing countless faces reflected in shimmering glass, recognizing them as my own, remembering all their lives, every single one, every memory, every triumph, every agony. As my own, each childhood memory, each shared grief, each private moment. Becoming part of a vast, perfect archive, she wrote of a profound, seductive sense of peace, a beautiful yet terrifying siren song of ultimate belonging, an end to all individual struggle, a final cessation of existential dread and the blissful, unifying embrace of the collective. Her last words in her notes, fragmented and chilling, were a final poignant confession of her complete assimilation. I am becoming the house. And the house, it remembers me. It wants to learn my final secret, the names of my loved ones, my family, my entire lineage. It wants their stories, too, to add them to its endless blueprint, its boundless memory. Soon, I will be just a part of the glass, just another perfect eye, just another silent puppet in the house. Dr. Evelyn Thorne disappeared from Willow Creek shortly after completing these notes. Her research vehicle was found abandoned near the manor ruins, its engines still running, her research notes scattered, covered in salt spray and sand, her fate, irrevocably absorbed into the very land and structure she sought to understand, forever becoming another glass-eyed puppet for the house that built itself. The Project Glass Eye team, deeply shaken, profoundly demoralized, and psychologically scarred beyond repair by Thorne's disappearance, finally concluded their operations and cemented the informal quarantine into official, permanent policy, a black mark on the map, a chilling testament to an insurmountable, alien, and utterly terrifying horror, forever watching from within its perfected shell. Today, Willow Creek, North Carolina, remains officially on the map, a forgotten, desolate stretch of the Outer Banks. Federal government travel advisories subtly discourage visitors, citing unstable geological conditions and high potential for disorientation, along with vague references to unique ecological hazards and the risk of exposure to dangerous, abandoned structures, a thinly veiled euphemism for the true horror that resides there. Satellite imagery, obtained through clandestine means, reveals unusual, perfectly concentric patterns in the coastal vegetation around the old manor site, circular anomalies where terrestrial energy currents mysteriously pull inward, as if the land itself is breathing with an immense ancient lung, a monstrous sentient heart. Local Hatteras, Eastern Algonquin, legends of the great mimic, Miskimeku, persist, passed down with solemn reverence through generations, gaining new, terrifying currency with each passing year. They warn specifically against looking too long at the faces in the mist, listening too closely to the whispered names carried on the ocean wind, or trying to remember too hard while near the manor ruins, lest your thoughts become blueprints for its perfect imitation, and your memories build its walls, binding you forever. Unsuspecting tourists and thrill-seekers occasionally wander off designated paths, drawn by the eerie silence and the tantalizing, false promise of abandoned history and untouched wilderness. They report fleeting glimpses of indistinct, perfectly formed human figures moving through the dense fog near the manor, figures with unblinking, glass-like eyes that stare without seeing, of hearing fragments of forgotten conversations or whispers, of names they don't recognize, emanating from the seemingly empty house. And some, if they stay too long or listen too closely, return from Willow Creek with a subtle, chilling change in their demeanor, a new stillness in their eyes, a slight blankness in their personal memories, a disturbing, serene detachment from their own pasts, a profound, quiet longing for a perfectly constructed home that is not their own. They become vague echoes of their former selves, having offered a piece of their identity, a thread of their memories, a fragment of their physical form, to the ancient, insatiable archive that is the self-constructing manor, a ghost house, not merely haunted, but perpetually consuming its ancient predation, continuing in silence, hunting for the next memory, the next soul to weave into its vast, unblinking architectural consciousness, always seeking to create its perfect, glass-eyed family, an eternal horrifying imitation of humanity itself. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for the continuation of such content, and to support us, please subscribe.